my God, it's been early morning. So welcome again, and wherever you're watching from, you're getting news updates straight from Hong Kong because I'm based in Hong Kong, so I'm going to give you all the latest happening in the city. Now, this week, hello. Hi, Pablo. Hi. Welcome to the show. And so this week, last week I gave you like a weekly wrap. We have a lot of things, political news, also like virus updates. But this week, I really want to focus on one story particularly that has been making global headlines, basically. And I am hi, Gregory. Hello. Where are you watching from? Hi, Brad. Thanks for joining the stream. So like I said, this week I really want to focus on just one really important story, is that hopefully some of you will notice or would have heard of this name called Jimmy Lai. So in the past week, it's really a huge storm in Hong Kong because Jimmy Lai is a you can't hear, C13 Stephanie said. I'm not sure. I think, can others hear me okay? Hi, Gregory, you're from North Carolina. Brett said he can hear me fine. Maybe try to quit the app and join again, or just click on something else to try, if that's okay. Apologies. Oh, great, you can hear now. Great. So yeah, Jimmy Lai, he's the boss of Apple Daily, which is one of the very prominent pro-democracy newspapers in Hong Kong, and also digital media. They do a lot of online media posts. So early this week, Jimmy Lai, the boss of this newspaper, he was arrested by Hong Kong police under the new national security law enacted here in the city. He was charged with, he was charged, the allegations against him was that fraud and also colluding with foreign forces, and there hasn't been a lot of details so far. What we know so far is that he was, the fraud is that he was renting the premises, the office, the newspaper's office, at a much lower rent. Somehow he was deceiving the land departments and whatever. But this is really comparatively the lesser charge, honestly. And under the national security law, he was charged with colluding with foreign forces. I believe the maximum penalty could be life in prison. So why, in what sense he colluded with foreign forces? Up until now, it's a lot of speculations in the city. It's a lot of speculation by, journalists, critics, academics, but there hasn't been really a very clear and official statement. But the guesses is that I'm saying that because he was donating money to a group ran by some activists, protesters that are calling for foreign sanctions on Hong Kong. Jimmy Lai basically, so let me just show you Jimmy Lai, who Jimmy Lai is. I have his photo up here. Let me just switch the camera. So this is Jimmy Lai. I'm sure you. So this is a very young him when he first started the business, Apple Daily. That's a big apple behind him. That's the logo of the newspaper. So this is a photo when he was interviewed by Reuters, I believe. So this is Jimmy Lai, and like I said, so he was accused of donating money to a group that calls for foreign sanctions on Hong Kong, and of course to Beijing that's unacceptable. And they were saying that you're donating money, then you're trying to collude with other organizations. Stephanie said, is there an organization that can represent or help him? Well, I believe he's getting a lot of legal helps right now. So he does have, a group of lawyers helping him out, I suppose. Um, so yeah, that's the Jimmy Lai's charge. He himself is a very prominent critic of China for years. Criticizing the leadership, criticizing the Chinese Communist Party. So he has been arrested, I believe, a couple of times this year already on multiple charges and multiple allegations, including joining some of the unauthorized protests in Hong Kong early this year. Um, but really, this charge levied against him this time was under national security. So it's actually not just him. Earlier this week, I think on the same day and also just a day after, Hong Kong police also arrested several activists in Hong Kong, including Agnes Chow. If you know Joshua Wong, so Agnes is a close ally to Joshua. They started the group Demo Sisto together, a political group in Hong Kong, which has dismantled right now. It is defunct because they announced that after the national security law comes into effect. Yes, worrisome, and also, so what's even more troubling to a lot of Hong Kong people is that during his arrest, or right after his arrests, the police actually raided the Apple Daily, the newsrooms, as well. So Gregory asked this question: am I not afraid of speaking this, given the current climate in Hong Kong? Well, I believe what I'm doing now is just really reporting what happened in Hong Kong. And to be honest, being a part of the media and also the journalist community in Hong Kong, definitely that's something very worrying and troubling to us because, like I said, so the police raided the Apple Daily office, including a part of the editorial section, the part in the office. So according to Hong Kong law, it's principally is not permissible because if police have to go through an office, say their executive's office, it's not allowed for them to, they're not allowed to like go through the editorial section because there could be some sensitive material, journalistic materials, sensitive documents, that kind of thing. And that's like part of, press freedom. So they're not supposed to go through any stuff in the editorial or any journalistic materials. But the police claim is that, they are, because Jimmy Lai's office is on the same floor, is in the same like premises, so they are also just, kind of like going around, and they didn't peek on anything or like go through anything specifically, but they did, from the live stream video that we have watched, they were kind of like going through some of the papers on journalists' desks, but really we don't know whether they have read it or definitely probably not like photo taking or like camera filming the documents. But again, details are scarce, and what we can see from the live stream was that they were ruffling some of the documents. But yes, who do you think can stop CCP from doing what they're doing? A very interesting question. So I'm actually, for this episode, we have a guest. We actually have two guests. So behold, audience. So this week I invited, so I'm actually going to bring him in a minute. Actually, let me just let him in for now. All right, so let's try this new feature. We are going to invite Orville Shell to the stream. So one of the topics that I also want to talk about today is that how now in November, the U.S. presidential election is coming up, and in Hong Kong, protests have been kind of, Trump. I know that a lot of Americans, they don't. Hi, Orville. Hello.
Hello.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good.
Good. So I was just telling our audience, so one audience really asked us, who do I think can stop the Chinese Communist Party from doing what they're doing, including, the arrest of activists like Jimmy, raiding the Apple Daily office, that kind of thing. So I think that is a very good segue to our session here. The how is the upcoming U.S. elections could impact Hong Kong, the movement, the protest movement in Hong Kong and such. So let me introduce to all of you Orville. So he is the Arthur Ross Director of the U.S.-China Relations at Asia Society in New York. He's also the former dean, and let me just switch the camera so that we can see you. Right. So yeah, he's also the former dean and professor at Berkeley's Graduate School of Journalism. So very honored to have you on in the show. Welcome.
Thank you.
So yeah, I guess one of the question, also burning question, I'm not sure, maybe that's really from Hong Kong people more, is that now we know the U.S. presidential election is coming up in November, and polls in the U.S. are showing that Biden could actually have a chance to win. But I guess my question here is that during in the past year or so, Hong Kong protesters have relied a lot on Trump, and really Trump did quite a lot in sanctioning China or putting a lot of pressure in China in terms of trade or even political pressure on China. So in your opinion, how would that change the dynamic between U.S.-China or U.S.-Hong Kong or even China-Hong Kong relations, say if Trump wins or lose this election?
Well, first let's start maybe and analyze what Trump has done. It seems to me if you look at the Trump administration, there are two features that are worth noting. The first is he's rather tougher position in pushing back against China and seeking to level what is admittedly an unlevel playing field in almost every area of endeavor. I mean, whether you look at business and trade, whether you look at the church, whether you look at civil society, the media, arts and culture, China is extremely restrictive, and we do not have a level playing field to play on. And so I think Trump has properly recognized that that's not sustainable. It's not reciprocal, it's not balanced, and it's not sustainable. The second element of the Trump administration that I think we must acknowledge is that Trump is unpredictable, on the verge sometimes of being outright, nearing impossible to predict, inconsistent, self-absorbed, self-referential, one could go on, which gives the appearance, his China policy, the appearance of being rather chaotic. In fact, I think there are elements within the government that are quite rational about it. So that's the first thing to recognize. Don't be deceived by the person of Trump, who is admittedly a buffoonish figure, with two things. One is that the United States has sort of come to the end of its rope in cutting slack to China. And second of all, it is not simply Donald Trump and the Republican Party who feel that way. Of all the issues that divide Washington, China is not one of them. The Democrats and the Republicans agree more uniformly on China policy, namely that something must be done, that China has been hectoring and bullying countries around Asia, that it has been playing the game, in an unfair way, that either to be leveled and fixed or it won't work. So what would Biden do? Well, I think Biden and his people would continue to push back. Remember, the pivot to Asia started under Obama, and many of his people are going to be recycled into the Biden administration if there is one. Right. But I think also they would keep the door open to diplomacy. So that would be a good sign. But whether they'll be more willing to cut China slack, indulge it in this and that, intellectual property theft, or playing games, or they can get Confucius institutes in America. They have 75 of them. We don't have a single institution like that in China. Why?
Mm.
It's unfair. It's unreciprocal. It's unbalanced. So I think there will be a difference. But I think Xi Jinping would be deceiving himself if he thought this whole relationship would snap back to the status quo of, say, 2 years ago, 3 years ago.
Mm-hmm. Right. So we've got some comments there in the comment section saying that saying that you have accurately summarized the situation. I suppose he was talking about how the level, unbalanced playing field between China and the U.S. One thing I do want to know is that I guess so. I watched I don't know if you're aware of the Reuters interview that they did with Jimmy Lai. I think in that interview, it was before his arrest. So basically, he was saying that Trump is the only U.S. president really crazy enough to, be so play crazy ball, play this hardball against China. Do you think now Trump's stance is still kind of like harsh on China? Part of the reasons critics say is to help with his re-election. Do you think, say, if Trump wins again, that would, if he would continue this path?
Well, it's very hard to predict what Donald Trump will do because he acts not according to the policies that he himself lays down, but to his own self-interest and his own perfidious nature. So that's very hard to predict. I do think you raise an interesting point that it is true, I think, that China has at last met an American leader who is as sometimes irrational and self-absorbed as many leaders of the Chinese Communist Party have been. And he's also been, as you note, has an element of kind of a really unpredictable craziness about him. And I think this has taught China something of a lesson. And I remember back in the day, for many, many decades, I've been working with China, trying to find ways to build bridges and telling Chinese Beijing, listen, don't push away Hillary Clinton and people like her and John Kerry and Barack Obama. These are rational, reasonable people. You can make a deal with them. You can work things out with them. And there may come a day when you don't have such people. And now that day has arrived. So they're having to deal with a person which even many Americans feel is beyond the pale. But he certainly has gotten China's attention. And I think in a curious way, if Biden does win, China has been put on notice that things have to change. Or engagement, a nice relationship, a reasonably well-ordered, functional relationship that has been worked out with the United States is over. Now, it may be too late to restore that relationship to functionality, but it's not too late to try. And I think it's undeniably true that it failed precisely because China did not live up to its end of the bargain, either in the World Trade Organization, question of stealing intellectual property, and the question of having reciprocal media relations, letting civil society organizations outside play a role in each other's countries, and one could go on.
Mm-hmm. Right. Mark, I believe he said hi to you earlier, and I believe you guys know each other from before. He asked a question saying that, do you think the U.S. government's reaction to China's crackdown on Hong Kong was effective or sufficient? I guess at this point, till this point, do you think that's effective?
Well, I think you have to be very realistic in the question of Hong Kong and recognize that the United States does not have all that many levers to pull. This was an agreement that was signed between Beijing and London. And so they are the proprietors, really, of maintaining the terms of that agreement. It was an international treaty. The United States really has nothing it can do besides certain levers of trade. The final lever it could pull, of course, the peg on the dollar, and that might happen. So I think that the United States has sort of done what can be done to express its displeasure, its disfavor, its outrage at what has happened in Hong Kong, but there's not an awful lot more it can do. Now, the question of Taiwan, that's another question entirely.
Okay, interesting. Um, let's get to the Taiwan part in a bit, but uh, one thing that I know that you wrote an article for the Wall Street Journal that was published just yesterday or this morning, I believe, right? I'm a little confused with the time zone thing. But so in that article, you talked about how important journalism is and like reporting is in terms of bringing the countries together or kind of like, form a bond or a tie between them, and how that now it's an uneven or unbalanced ground that China and US have. You in the article you mentioned something really interesting. And I quote you, you said Xi Jinping, he's using China's new wealth and power sort of like a bully. Why would you say that?
Yeah.
And like in terms of a journalism perspective?
Well, first let's start with the suggestion that China is engaging in precisely the kind of activity that traditionally the Chinese Communist Party, historically speaking, criticized the great powers for exercising, namely hectoring, bullying, throwing their weight around, forcing smaller countries to do their bidding, even though they might not want to, but because of trade and economics, they had no choice. I think it's undeniable that is happening again, and it is a.
And so
I think
you're by that you're saying like economic, for example, the Belt and Road Initiative involving those like smaller developing countries. You're referring to like that kind of initiative?
well, I think the Belt and Road Initiative actually has some positive aspects. How it ends up, we don't know. I'm not so much referring to that, although there are some elements there that need to be looked at. I'm looking at its attitude towards India. How in a few short weeks it just sort of
Mm-hmm.
completely antagonized India. How by arresting two Canadians punitively for no reason except to punish
Mm-hmm.
them for Mengwan Shou and the Huawei, the daughter of the Huawei chief. They've completely alienated China by kidnapping Swedish citizens. They've alienated Sweden. They've, of course, alienated Norway over Liu Xiaobo and the boycotts of salmon purchases and things like that. If you look around the world, I think it's quite striking to note how China, his sort of wolf warrior diplomacy, his sort of bullying, hectoring attitude, has alienated countries. Look at Australia. Striking. China's Australia's largest trading partner, and yet there is a sea change in attitude, a new national security law. I mean, it's I've never seen such a stark change in the political attitude of a country towards China as in a country like Australia. We see complements of that in Japan, in Korea. Of course, Korea doesn't dare speak out because it's so dependent economically and so close to China. Look what they've done to Hong Kong. Look how they've alienated people in Taiwan. Look at the Czech Republic. It's pretty amazing. So I think you would have to say that as China's gotten wealthier and more powerful, it has used that wealth and power in ways which often alienate more than they win over. And I think that's unnecessary and not in China's interest, and certainly not in the interest of global peace.
Right. There was just some comment there saying that as the world grows more nationalistic and isolationist, it would be more and more difficult to effectively contain China. I guess that's also kind of like what you said. China tries to like alienate countries and nations, so it's kind of like not to have a powerful like global international front. Another question I have when we talk about
Well,
journalism.
let me just stop you there. You've raised an interesting question. Why alienate China? what again is, I think, so striking is that we had for 8 US presidential administrations a policy of engagement, where from Nixon
Mm,
and Kissinger in 1972 right on down through Obama, each of the presidents, despite misgivings about Chinese communism, Leninism, et cetera, they still sought to cut slack to Beijing, to include China in the World Trade Organization, to include it in the global system. And yet, in
mm,
the end, it was really China who made the system of engagement inoperable. And it was
mm,
when that system failed, which was within the last year or so, that we began to get this question of alienation. So it's an important thing to remember that even though the West and China all together, Hercules need to trace and to include and to bend the metal of Mao's revolution somewhat and slowly try to, help China become part of the global world of trade and organizations and common principles that outside of China.
mm. There was this, yeah, totally. Like you said that the U.S. has been always engaging in this a policy of engagement, trying to loop China in different like systems and mechanisms in the world. There was this comment and question saying that do you think the U.S. failed to foresee this of the Chinese Communist Party?
Well, this is a very interesting question. There are some people who think uh, the United States and these 8 presidential administrations were incredibly naive, that a Marxist Leninist state never changes because it's only dedicated to keeping itself in power. But there are other people who believe that if America was going to have pretensions as a leader, it did need to try to sort of embrace China and slowly incorporate it into the global system in the hopes that it would slowly evolve, not maybe into a liberal democratic form of governance, but something that was increasingly open, increasingly tolerant, increasingly dedicated to playing by the rules of the game of countries outside of China. Now, that didn't happen. My own view is that engagement has failed, but it was worth trying. And it was a really a heroic effort, I think, to imagine that we could, China would change enough to make other countries feel comfortable trading with it, sharing international waters with it, including it in all sorts of civil society exchanges, cultural exchanges. But that's not turned out to be the case. And that is what I think makes China's progress a real tragedy, because actually they had the United States neutralized. They had the United States sort of trying to help.
Right,
And Xi
right.
Jinping, in effect, lost that, turned China, America, and many other countries into very skeptical competitors, if not adversaries. And you have to ask yourself,
Mm,
why do that? What was gained? What's the national interest for China in making America as hostile as it now is? And believe me, it's increasingly hostile. It was, in my view, for nothing. It ended engagement, and it ended the best scenario for China to continue to be a great power with an amazingly estimable record of economic development. And it's put all that at jeopardy. And one has to ask oneself, why?
and do you think that well, I mean, I suppose from my understanding, usually the Chinese argument would that be, well, look at us now. We're very powerful. We are also one of the largest economies in the world. We're doing great. We're progressing in terms of so many aspects, technology, finance, aerospace development, that kind of thing. So if you ask China, is it worth it? Maybe they'll say yes. Then what can we say
Well,
to this?
tell me why it's worth it. I mean, that you raised the question, is it worth it? And I've described to you that it isn't worth it. I can see no worth in it whatsoever because China had a ticket to ride in the global economy. Everybody, I mean, just even Obama towards the even latter years of his government was saying, we do not view China's rise as inimical to America's interest.
Mm.
So can you suggest anything that was gained by this process of alienation? I can't think of anything. Sure, they have the right to do it. You can puff yourself up as a nationalist country when you get rich and powerful and get some aircraft carriers, and you can go scaring everybody in the neighborhood. But why would you do that?
Mm.
What does it gain you?
Unclear.
Well, I
Honestly,
would
I
say,
get the question.
to put it, yes, bluntly, unclear, definitely.
Mm. Right. So yeah, I guess so. What about your take on the Jimmy Lai's arrest and also the raid in the newsroom? Do you see a diminishing press freedom in Hong Kong?
Well, I think that goes without saying. The free press is on the brink of being sort of folded into the same situation that we see on the mainland. And I think Jimmy Lai's arrest was a prelude to that. He was the most provocative, insightful person that they could think of, and they wanted to send a message. But he certainly will not be the last person who's either arrested or the last media outlet that's closed down. I think, you have to remember that the Chinese Communist Party's view of the media was one that was described in 1942 by Chairman Mao and then on forums on art and literature, where he laid it out very clearly. The role of culture, of press, and things of that nature were very clearly to be the megaphone of the party. There's no notion, which is the heart and soul of Jimmy Lai's Apple Daily, of the press as an independent institution that is a watchdog against malfeasance in government, in the church, in corporations, in society. So there's an absolute contradiction. And Mao Zedong loved to talk about two kinds of contradictions. One was diwo maodun, a antagonistic contradiction. And the other was a contradiction among the people. Former you can solve by discussion. The latter, antagonistic contradiction, you resolve by struggle and violence. And the media, I am afraid, is a antagonistic contradiction that can only be solved by one side or the other winning, shutting down all the media that opposes the party. And I think that's Hong Kong's future.
Sorry, you just broke up there. You think that's Hong Kong's?
I think that's Hong Kong's future. That the free press and Hong Kong has had a very vibrant free press, is basically now like a block of ice out in the sun melting away.
Wow, that's definitely delightful to hear as a journalist working in Hong Kong.
Well, I think you know it better than I do because you work there, and I'm sure your own program, you may have some people arriving on your doorstep before long.
Well, fortunately, I still haven't got that coming from me. But yes, that's also like one of my concerns. So just like some concerns of some of my journalist friends in Hong Kong as well. We do see a lot of when I was out there trying to report the protest early this year and last year, we do face a lot of we got checked by the police and they would try to push you away and all that things. So yeah, I mean, I didn't start my career like for that long. Definitely not as seasoned and experienced as you are. But I do also like start to see the kind of shift and change in Hong Kong's kind of the media landscape. It is diminishing in my view. So yeah.
Yeah, Jimmy Lai's arrest is really the opening shot in what I think you can expect to be a long and thorough purge of media outlets that continue to report negatively on China, negatively on the politics of Hong Kong. And as you'll note, even just last week, Hu Xijin, who's the editor of the China Global Times, said that if the United States did not renew visas for the 100 odd media representatives in America, that were going to be expelled as a tit for tat gesture for the ones who've been expelled from China. That they would expand their punitive actions even to Hong Kong. In other words, to begin to expel Americans from Hong Kong. So that would be another escalation. And I think the fact that he said that indicates that that's coming.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's common belief that, what the state media said is pretty much what the party thinks and plans, I believe. So yeah, I mean, it's very interesting discussion with you. Really, really insightful, just like what our audience said as well. So thank you so much for joining our stream, and thank you so much for joining In a Nutshell with Almond. Really great to have you on, and we love to have you on sometime later again as well.
Well, thank you, Almond. It's been
thank you so much.
Pleasure talking.
Thank you. Right. Bye-bye.
Cheers.
Cheers. Well, that is definitely a very interesting discussion with Professor Orville Schell. That's he's from Asia Society. He studies a lot of Chinese, U.S.-China relations. So really great to have you on, have him on. And I saw from the comment section, everyone is very thrilled about this discussion as well. So I'm really glad that we had that discussion. So yeah, I mean, just a little clap back, I guess, is that it is definitely a worrying situation happening in not only China, in the U.S., but also in Hong Kong. Definitely, the shrinking freedom of press, and you know what? At the very beginning of the stream, I've mentioned that we have two guests in this episode, and the upcoming guests will have. So he's a journalist, a friend that I have in Hong Kong, and I want to bring him up and just to bring him on the show to kind of just give you guys a sort of first-hand look as to what is it like to be a journalist, a young journalist in particular, in Hong Kong right now in the era of under the national security law and tightening Beijing's control. But unfortunately, because of technical problem, because of the structure that we have on the app, I'll have to end the stream and then I'll restart it and bring the next guest on. So please stay tuned.